Hello, today we are looking at a different kind of set. This one is based on an image as opposed to a PDF drawing, and it's from another set designer friend of mine called Farid. Because it's a picture and not a PDF, we can't import it in with snapping geometry settings. Instead, we're going to use the image as a reference and draw the set out from scratch. It's a little bit more complex than the previous set because this one needs you to adjust individual points to get certain kind of inclines. But we will manage that by using meshes instead of solid objects. So let's get into it. Okay, so before we get into drafting, as always, it's a good habit to organize the layers and classes that we're going to be using first. For this drawing, I'm going to have two design layers. One of them is my reference, and the other is my set build. I'm also going to have a couple of classes. So namely, I will have a 00 reference, 01 frame, 01 inner skin, 01 outer skin, and 01 top light. Okay, and with that out of the way, I'm going to import in my reference object. So I'm going to do that by importing in a image file. And I have my file over here. So I'm just going to import this in. Because I'm not going to be tracing this out point for point, it doesn't really matter what I'm doing over here. So I'm going to leave things as is and just hit OK, and the drawing will appear inside my drafting space. So with this in the space, although I'm not going to be tracing it, I do want it to look as close to the intended scale as possible. So I'm still going to scale this to match the same numbers. And it's the same process for this with the image selected. I'm heading over to modify, scale objects. And I'm going to pick a current distance over here. So I'm just going to use this one. And my new distance will be 6,000 millimeters. I'm just going to hit OK. It will resize a little bit. And now I want to pick the middle point of this image and set it to 0, 0. And while it's now in center, I just want it a little bit out of the way. So I'm going to put it over here. So when I'm drawing, I can look back at this reference image to make sure I'm on the right track. I also want to make sure that it's in the correct class. So this is going to be in the reference class. And I want it to be in the reference design layer. You may notice that you get this cross because images don't have transparency. So I want to make sure that in my design layers, I set them to show snap others. And we should be able to see what we're working with. Now that I have the image here, what I want to do is I want to break this up into little segments. So we can see that our working area is a 6 meter by 15 meter stretch. So using the rectangle tool, I'm going to draw a rectangle first. And I want to make this rectangle 15,000 millimeters by 6,000 millimeters. And I want to make sure that the middle of this rectangle is set to 0, 0. This is meant to be an outline of the working space that I am using today, so I don't want to fill. I want it to be hollow in the middle. To make things a little bit easier for me from here, I also want to draw another rectangle. This one is going to be at a width of 1500 mm and a height of 1000 mm. It is also going to be hollow inside, and I'm going to place this over here. So what I'm going to be working with is this little rectangle over here, and then from there we'll just multiply it to assemble the larger drawing as a whole. Just to be clear that this is where I'm going to be working with, I want to select all of this, and I'm going to change the pen color to a red color, kind of like boundary lines, just so that I know that's what I'm working with. I also want to make sure that they are all in the set build layer and their class is reference. Okay, and now I can zoom in over here to begin assembling my first block. I'm going to imagine that in the building of this set, it's going to be put together by 4" by 4" blocks of wood. So for that timber, I'm going to use the rectangle tool, for which the shortcut is the number 4 key on your keypad. If you're wondering why, it's because there are 4 points to a rectangle. So I'm just going to draw in a rectangle over here, and I want this rectangle to be at a width of 1500 mm, and I want it to have a height of 4 inches. So if you forgot, Vectorworks allows you to input in dimensions from many different units. You just need to make sure that you specify your symbol at the back. So with this in place, I'm going to drag this down to the bottom corner, and I'm going to option drag this up to get the top. I'm going to use the rectangle tool again to go from here to here, and once I got the correct height, I'm going to change the width to 4 inches, and I'm just going to drag this to the corner. And we can just option drag this or alt drag if you are on Windows. I never seem to be able to remember whether it's alt drag or control drag. I will put it up somewhere on the screen. Okay, so now I have the base of my frame. If I look at this in an isometric view, you can see that this is how each block is going to be put together, and it will multiply from here. Okay, before I add in the vertical beams, I want to draw the footprint of a vertical beam. So this is going to be a 4x4 timber, just like everything else. So I'm just going to change this to 4 inches by 4 inches. A good thing to note is over here Vectorworks says 102, but you must remember that your input was 4 inches. So 4 inches might not necessarily translate exactly to 102 mm. It's just not showing you decimal points over here. So just don't take that for granted, because it will add up if you're being very particular. So with my vertical timber in place over here, I'm going to use Command E to extrude out my rectangles. They're all going to be at a height of 4 inches. So I'm just going to do the same thing for all of them. 4 inches. This is also going to be 4 inches, and this is going to be 4 inches. Okay, I want this to extrude out to, I want to extrude this vertical piece of timber, but at the same time I want to account for the fact that my bracing at the bottom has a height of 4 inches. So how I'm going to do this is I'm going to let Vectorworks do the math for me, and I'm going to extrude this guy out, and I'm just going to type in 2400 minus 4 inches, and that should give me 2298 thereabouts. So this is my vertical beam. I'm going to put this over here, and once it's in place, I'm going to go to my top land, make sure it is selected, and just use my mirror tool to mirror it across to the other side. By the way, the shortcut for the mirror tool is the equal sign. It's kind of punny when you think about it, but it does help you remember things a little bit better. So with that, I have my lower half and vertical bracing for my frame. So from here, I want to work on the top half of the bracings frame thing. So I'm going to shift over to the front view, and if I looked at my designer's concept, he wanted an 8-degree slope from here to here. So I might not be able to promise him exactly 8 degrees, but I will try to get as close to it as possible. So using a line tool, I'm going to start from here, and I'm just going to draw out in this direction, and I'll tap once on my keyboard to get to the length, and I'll tap again to get to the angle. I want my angle to be -8, and this is going to be where my line sort of lines up. So from here, I know that my very first point is going to start from the topmost point of the vertical block, but the second one is going to cut into the block a little bit. So using my tape measure tool, I need to figure out what this distance is, and it's about 14 millimeters. So to make it easier for my math, I'm going to take it to be 15 millimeters. I'm also going to use the tape measure tool over here, and I find out this is about 196 millimeters. I'll round that off to about 200 millimeters, and this last one is about 213, 212. I'll round that off to 215. Okay. It's important that I commit these small numbers into memory, because as they move into the staggered downward moving steps, I want that difference in the heights to be consistent so that they all have that same decline. Going back into my left isometric view, we can just ignore that line for now. I'm going to select this vertical beam, and I'm going to go into my modify menu over here and go to convert, and convert this to a mesh. And what this will do is it will allow me to adjust each individual point on the object as opposed to the object as a whole. So you'll also notice that the object info palette now says this is a mesh and not extrude. You'll also notice you have a little bit more control with your points over here. So what I want to be able to do is I want to switch this over to vertex only, and use my left and right arrow keys over here to find my way to the point that I want to adjust. So this is one point that I want to adjust, and I want this to drop a Z height of 15 millimeters. I'm just going to minus this by 15. I'm going to move along again to find the next point, and this is going to go down by 15 millimeters as well. Same thing over here. This is also going to be converted to a mesh, and I want to move along to find the point I want to adjust and drop the height by 15. Move along again and drop this height by 15 as well. So if I were to switch back to my front view now, you can see that the mesh does line up with that 8-degree line that I have. So I'm going to go ahead from here and switch back to my left ISO view and convert this to a mesh, as well as this. And I want to go in and adjust the point. So this point is going to have a difference of 200 millimeters. Same thing over here. And the one at the back will have a difference of 215 millimeters. And I'll do the same thing for this guy. This is 215. Minus 200. And minus 200. So switching back to my front view, we can see that the tops of the vertical beams line up with my negative 8-degree line here. It's not quite perfect, at this end of the top ply, it looks like a difference of 3 millimeters. So I can go into it to fix it quickly. So going into this vertical block, I'm going to increase this by 3 millimeters. Same thing over here. +3, +3. And same thing for this column. +3, +3, +3, +3. And if I check that again, it is almost there, but I think I'm gonna make my peace with this as it is. I no longer need this line, so I am gonna delete it. And we can now move on to doing... From here, I'm going to start on the beams that connect these vertical beams together. Okay, what I want to do is I want to draw in a rectangle, and I want to use the auto planing mode over here instead of the layer plane as your working plane. It's a neat little feature because what it lets you do is it lets you draw on a surface other than the ground plane of your drawing. So you can see that the solid object highlights a different color, and it's trying to tell you that this is where you are drawing your 2D shape on. So I'm going to draw my rectangle over here, and I'm going to set this to a height of 102 and a width of 102, or rather 4 by 4, just to be precise. And I also want to drag this up to the top over here. Okay, and I'm going to use the extrude command to extrude this out. And let's just say this is a 1500 millimeters. Okay, looking at this in my front view, I want to drag this rectangle a little bit out this way while holding the shift key so that it lines up neatly. Okay, why I'm doing this is because I want the rectangle to overlap on both sides of my vertical beam. So once it's overlapping both sides, I want to select this object, click on the rotate tool, and use this corner as my reference point, and this next point over here as my next reference point, and tilt it upward to about here. Okay, this puts me in a place where it is sort of overlapping both beams, but I need it to be a little bit more biased to this side. So I'm going to pull it down a little bit more, and a little bit more. Okay, you can see that the crossover beam is overlapping both my vertical beams here. And this is important because I am going to use that overlap as my subtraction point for the modeling tool. And that's as easy as picking two objects, going into the model menu and subtracting solids. I want to make sure I retain my subtracting object, and I want to select this as the object to be subtracted from. So I hit OK. And you can see it's got a very nice flush connection over here. I'll do the same thing over here. Model, subtract. And I want to make sure I pick the same object as my subtracting object and hit OK. So there we go. From here, I just want to option drag it over to the other beam over here. So I'm going to move on to creating the other two beams to connect these frames up together, but I'm noticing that there's a little 1 millimeter off over here. So I'm just going to drag this up to fix that little gap. It might not bother most people, but it kind of bugs me when it doesn't line up. So then I have to check this side as well to make sure it's sitting right, and it's not. So this means that I need to go back to my front view of this to adjust this guy a little bit. Just gonna rotate this here, and come down to here. And because I rotated it, I need to do the subtraction again. So I'm gonna subtract here, and I'm gonna subtract this side as well. And that should be a little better than the first cut. So I'm gonna duplicate this over here. And we can move on to the vertical, and then we can move on to the missing beams to finish this off. I think I'm going to start with this end. So I'll just option drag this up to here. And I want to convert this into a mesh. And once it's a mesh, I'm just going to go to that individual point which needs an adjustment and take it down by 15 mm. And I just want to duplicate this over to the other end. And if I'm not wrong, if I look at this from the front, it seems to be okay. Cool. So that pretty much makes up my frame for the structure. Before I get carried away and go into duplicating and adding other details to this, I want to select all this and make sure that it's in the correct class and design layer. So this is a frame. Yes, I want to apply it to all sub-objects within groups. And I want to add my top ply at this point before I move on to duplicating and adjusting anything. So this is pretty straightforward. It is a rectangle, and I want this to be on the ground plane. This is a rectangle with a width of 1500 mm and a height of 1000 mm. I want to extrude this up by 12 millimeters because I'm assuming we're using 12 mil ply for this. And once it's in place, I just want to drag it up to the top of my structure over here. And I'll look at it from the front to fix that decline. Okay, so over here, I want to make sure that I rotate this from here to here, and I want it to line up over here. So you'll notice there's a little bit of a gap over here. So using the tape measure tool, I can see that it is about 15 millimeters. So going back into my isometric view, I just want to drag this forward by 7.5. And that should even out the gap on both sides of the frame. I also want to make sure this top ply is on the top ply class. And we can now move on to duplicating this frame to make up the rest of the structure. This is not too complex. It's just a simple matter of selecting everything that makes up one block in the set. And I'm going to use my Move by Points tool, making sure that the object retention mode is on. I just want to drag this forward by 1500. And I'm going to repeat this. And looking at that in isometric view again, you can see that the structure is starting to take shape. Okay, each block in this set piece has vertical beams that are 300 mil shorter than the previous block. So what I want to do over here is I want to go into each vertical beam. Because it's already a mesh, I can manipulate its points one at a time. So I want to go into the highest point of the beam, and I want to bring it down by 300 mil. And I'm going to continue to do this for every point in that block. And as I do this, you will realize that the structure starts to take its terraced progressive look. Once the vertical beams themselves have been adjusted, I'll just go in to drag down the rest of the pieces, remembering that you can hold B on your keyboard to see through solid objects. Same thing for this piece as well. And there you go, you see that the shape starts to come together. So I'm not going to make you sit through me going through each one of these, so I'm just going to forward through it with the magic of television. And then we can move on to duplicating it and skinning the rest of the sides. Okay, and there we go. We have something that resembles much closer to what the set designer had wanted. And from here, I want to move on to skinning the inside of the frame. So that's this little portion over here. I just don't want it to be bare timber. So this is pretty straightforward. It's just a rectangle that is at a width of 3 millimeters because it's 3 ply, and it's got a height of 1000 millimeters. I'm gonna extrude this up to a height of 80 millimeters. And then what I want to do with this is I want to pick it up from the corner and I want to place it over here. So just lining this up with this edge. There we go. So just to mask off that little edge so that it looks like it's symmetrical and it matches the feel of the rest of the set. I also want to duplicate this to the rest of the spots. So for that, I'm going to do the move by points tool over here. And I'm just going to pick it up from here and move down to here and repeat it again. and that should do it. The last one wouldn't need it because they're gonna be wedged up against each other. At this point, it's almost ready to duplicate upwards. So I want to select all of this. I almost forgot. I want to make sure that the new pieces of skin that I added on the inside are in the correct class. So with bigger sets like this, it kind of gets really out of hand very quickly if you don't make it a point to go in and change your classes for things that you draw in. So for me, I tend to forget, so I try to set little reminders for myself to come back and move it to the correct spot. So I'm going to select all of this, and I want to do a move by points tool. I'm just going to do a from here upwards by 1000, and I'm going to repeat that again and again and again and one more time. So you can see that the large mass of the set does fall into my original guidelines. So it's why I have them there, so that I have something to work towards filling up. And with everything here completed, I want to select it all, and I want to use the mirror tool, and I want to mirror down from here upwards. And looking at all of this in my isometric view, we can see that it looks kind of like what my set designer had envisioned. So we can now move on to skinning the outsides of the structure. So for the outside, this outer portion is of course the easiest piece to move forward with. It is just a rectangle. This one has a height of 6 meters because it's 3mm ply once again. And I want to extrude this out to be 2400 millimeters. And zooming in, I want to pick this up from the inside corner, and I want to match it up to the wall over here. I also want to make sure that it's in the correct class. Okay, then we move on to the front, which is unfortunately a fair bit more frustrating to do because of the nature of the angled front end of the frames. I am gonna need to draw in a single ply first that has a width of 1500 millimeters and a height of 3, and I want to extrude this out to 2400 millimeters, and I want to match this up to the corner first, and then I need to go in to move this first to the correct class, and I want to turn this into a mesh once again. So because I kind of remember the numbers that I initially worked with, I know that I need to bring down this inner portion by 215 mm, I think. So I'm just going to try it out here. So try to bring it down by 215. And we can see that it is a little bit lower than where it needs to be. So if I remember correctly, it's an extra 3 millimeters. So yeah, just gonna give it back that 3 millimeters. And we have the outside skin. So from here, I need to duplicate this to its partners over here. So we can do the same thing we did with the frames, and we can just do a move by points. So I'm going to use the move by points tool over here. I'm going to pick it up from the middle and just move it along. I'm not going to do all 10, so I'm just going to do the first 5 because it is mirrored, so I can just fix the first 5 and then mirror it over two ways. For this, I'm gonna go in, I'm gonna look for the point, and I'm gonna bring this down by 300 millimeters. And it's pretty much the same process as you saw with the frames itself. Just that this one is a little bit less fussy because it's not as many points. And there we go. So since I have my outer frames in place over here, I want to select them all and then go into my top plane. And using my mirror tool, I want to mirror them on my mirror line to cover the front. And since I have them selected, I'm gonna also go back into my isometric view here. And going back into my top plane. So I want to mirror this again using the mirror tool. Go in to find your reference point and just duplicate it over to the top. So if I were to go back into my isometric view here and I revolve around my set, you can see that I have the back end. So what's missing is this piece over here. Same drill, just go in, mirror tool, and making sure that I have the middle of my set. That should give me a mostly completed set. And we can see that it looks pretty much like what my set designer had envisioned. Okay, one more thing that I want to do over here is I want to show the viewer that certain components of this set can open. And I do that by using the 3D rotate tool. I just need to select one of the top lines over here. And I want to make sure that I'm looking at the set from this angle so that I can see where the hinge would be. I want to go into modify, go to rotate 3D. And in this case, I want to rotate it by negative 90 degrees on the y-axis. So that's the green line over here. I'm gonna hit, make sure it's on next mouse click and hit OK. And zoom in, and I want to click on this point over here. And that will flip open the ply by 90 degrees. I'm going to do the same thing with this piece as well. Just to show that some of the ply is open. And we're going to do one more on the other side. So let's say this guy over here. This time it's going to be a rotate 3D by 90 degrees. On next mouse click and still on the y-axis. This one's going to be from here. So there you go. Now I have a set which resembles pretty closely to what my set designer wants. From here I can move on to adding the bridge, I can move on to adding texture, and even maybe some image props to show that people can hide within the set. You can also move forward to throw this into a bunch of sheet views to show other viewers what the set is supposed to look like in front view, top view, and isometric view. I'm not going to go into that again because I've already done that in the previous one. So I'll put the link somewhere in the screen to help you find your way there if you need it. So that covers the second sample of drafting a set in Vectorworks. It's a slightly different design which required a slightly different set of tools. But once the drawing is down on the workspace, it is the same process to publish it, export it, modify it, or share it. I'm not going to go into those steps in this video because I've covered those in different videos before, so you can check those out if you need help with that. But that is all for now. Thanks for watching. I hope it was helpful.